theory and practice both have a role to play in studies of digital culture, and I think there's sometimes a tendency maybe to place too much emphasis on practice at the cost of kind of theorizing and thinking. By having the relationship between theory and practice, you have at least one example of what you're trying to talk about because you've produced one. By trying to address the ideas both at the level of abstract arguments in articles and at the level of these artworks or performances that try to convey them in another form, that was quite a useful duality. There's also a kind of ethical dimension there with kind of studies of digital culture, where rather than appropriating something someone else has made and not necessarily knowing the context from which it emerged or whether they would be happy with what you're doing with it or saying about it, you're inflicting that on your own creations. I'm quite aware that as a researcher there's this sometimes dubious stance of standing on the sidelines, claiming to understand things that you're not necessarily personally involved or invested in. There's an issue with studies of online culture of how invested you ought to be or have to be in the phenomena you're studying, to kind of seem to pass judgment on all selfie takers as someone who's never taken a selfie strikes me as potentially dubious, but to be so bound up in a culture that you're unable to see it from the outside also seems like it's not going to necessarily generate useful knowledge.